The heat here is a physical entity, not just a condition. It is a slow, crushing weight that settles into the fibers of my uniform and clings to the sweat-slicked skin beneath. I taste dust constantly, a fine, gritty powder that coats my teeth and cracks my lips. This communications outpost is little more than a fortified shipping container baking under a merciless Middle Eastern sun, surrounded by miles of shimmering, empty sand. I shift the weight of my plate carrier, the ceramic trauma plates digging into my shoulders. 7 years I have carried this weight, physical and psychological, knowing that every moment outside these thin walls could be my last. The constant proximity to danger does something strange to the mind. It sharpens the edges of reality. Every decision is immediate, every breath calculated. Here, my existence is defined by duty, sacrifice, and the absolute necessity of survival. My uniform, stiff with dried sweat and the residue of countless patrols, is a symbol of everything I have given up. It is respected, feared, and understood by the men and women who share this desolate corner of the earth with me. But lately, when I look down at the faded camouflage, I realize it means absolutely nothing to the people I left behind. To them, I am a photograph on a mantelpiece, a convenient explanation for a tax break, or perhaps simply an absence they have comfortably learned to navigate around. The distance isn't measured in miles, it's measured in priorities. My mind, despite the immediate demands of my job, often drifts a dangerous luxury I afford myself only in the deep, quiet hours of the night shift. It always goes back to the same place, the dining room. The Johnson family dining room was, and I suppose still is, the gravitational center of our world. It was where decisions were made, where alliances were forged, and where, every holiday, we were forced to acknowledge our collective existence. I can recall every detail of that magnificent mahogany table. It wasn't just furniture. It was an altar. I remember the deep, rich, almost black grain of the wood, polished to a mirror sheen that reflected the soft light of the crystal chandelier hanging above. I remember running my small fingers over the subtle scratches near the headmarks left by generations of silverware and clumsy elbows. It was massive, capable of seating 8 comfortably, with room to expand for the mandatory holiday overflow. The 8 high-backed chairs were upholstered in a heavy, forest green velvet. Each one was perfectly weighted, solid, and assigned. My chair was the one closest to the bay window, where I could sometimes catch a glimpse of the first snowfall while trying to avoid eye contact with my Aunt Carol. It was my chair, a fixed point in a constantly shifting universe. That memory, 7 years old now, carried the weight of a promise that when I finally came home, that seat would be waiting. It was Thanksgiving back home, the last Thursday in November. Here, it was merely Thursday hotter, dustier, and punctuated by the occasional distant thump of ordnance testing. We had managed to secure a few precious minutes on the satellite phone, the connection notoriously choppy and unreliable. I sat hunched over the receiver in the communications tent, the air conditioner struggling valiantly against the desert heat. I pressed the phone tight against my ear, straining to pierce through the static and the echoing delay. And then, suddenly, I was there. I heard the cacophony of a busy, happy holiday. The sound of real laughter, not the forced, nervous chuckle we use here to mask fear. I heard the unmistakable clinking of my mother's fine china, the scrape of chairs being moved, and the deep, booming voice of my father telling a joke I'd heard 100 times. "Eliza. Honey, are you there? Speak up." My mother's voice, shrill with the stress of hosting, cut through the noise. "I'm here, Mom." "Happy Thanksgiving," I managed, trying to inject a warmth into my voice that I didn't quite feel. My focus was split, half on the conversation, half on the comms officer monitoring the line for security breaches. She launched into a rapid-fire monologue about the menu. The turkey was too dry, the dog ate a roll, Brenda was late, the temporary guests, the Millers from down the street, were already on their 3rd glass of wine. It was all so wonderfully, carelessly, normal. I listened, nodding to myself, painting the picture in my mind. The silver serving dishes, steaming, the massive centerpiece, the crowded hallway. I waited for the natural pause, the moment where she would inevitably say, "We wish you were here, honey. We left your spot open," but she didn't. I had to force it. I needed to hear the lie, the comforting assurance that I was still a necessary component of their perfect picture. "Sounds like a full house," I said, trying to sound casual, breezy even. "Where did you put my spot this year? Did you have to squeeze me between Dad and Aunt Carol?" There was a slight hesitation on the line, a background noise that sounded like a heavy glass being set down. "Oh, honey," she finally replied, her tone dismissive, slightly annoyed that I had interrupted her narrative flow. We're really packed in. Brenda brought that huge new 3-tiered serving platter for her famous sweet potato casserole, and we just needed the space for the cranberry sauce this year. My breath hitched. Cranberry sauce? We'll save you a piece of pie, though. Don't worry. The words weren't spoken with malice. They weren't intended to wound. That was the truly devastating part. It was purely, effortlessly careless. They hadn't consciously removed my seat. They had simply prioritized a side dish over my presence. They needed a few extra square inches of mahogany, and my 7 years of service, my constant risk, my entire identity as their daughter, was worth less than a bowl of jellied fruit. My spot, the fixed point, gone, replaced by a condiment. I murmured an acknowledgement, a lie about how grateful I was for the pie, and hung up quickly before the tightness in my chest could translate into a sound that would require explanation. I sat in the dark tent, the static humming in my ears, and felt a cold, deep ache settle in my stomach. I was not just absent. I was superfluous. They didn't miss me. They simply enjoyed the extra counter space. A few weeks later, the chill of late December had started to penetrate even this harsh climate. The holiday season was in full swing back home, and the mandatory Christmas cheer was palpable, even through the grainy photos my mother occasionally sent. I managed another call, hoping to speak to my father, perhaps to gauge the financial health of his floundering construction business, a subtle habit I'd developed, always trying to assess the stability of the foundation I was supposedly returning to. My sister, Brenda, answered instead. Her voice, always sharp and entitled, was amplified by the poor connection. I didn't announce myself immediately. I just listened. She was complaining, loudly, to my father, who sounded weary and distracted. "Dad, seriously, we need to deal with this before the New Year's party," Brenda whined. "Aunt Carol is bringing the whole country club crowd this year, and I need the corner space for my new champagne bucket and ice sculpture. We seriously need to move that hideous old chair. It's just gathering dust in the garage, and it looks ridiculous." The hideous old chair, my chair, gathering dust. In the garage, the casual omission of Thanksgiving had been a deep cut. This was the final, clean severing of the thread. They hadn't just used my seat for cranberry sauce. They had banished the physical manifestation of my absence to the dark, forgotten corners of the house. It was a piece of junk, an inconvenience blocking the path to her champagne bucket. I gripped the receiver so hard my knuckles turned white. The blood pounded in my ears, drowning out the static. I wanted to scream, to demand that she put it back, to remind her that I was risking everything so she could worry about ice sculptures. But I didn't get the chance. The connection, as if sensing the emotional overload, sputtered, crackled violently, and died, leaving me in stunned, ringing silence. I sat there, staring out the tiny, reinforced window of the outpost. Outside, the moon cast long, skeletal shadows across the sand. The silence was absolute, broken only by the rhythmic thumping of my own heart. The pain, the grief of being so profoundly unloved and unmiscrystallized into something cold, hard, and terrifyingly clear. It wasn't a hot, blinding rage. It was the chilling, clinical resolve of a focused operator. I realized then that I had spent 7 years begging for scraps of affection, hoping they would value my sacrifice enough to simply save me a chair. I had been waiting for their permission to exist in their world, but they had erased me. They had moved on, and my belonging was now an obstacle to their comfort. A profound shift occurred in my mind. I would no longer be the forgotten daughter, the victim of their casual disregard. I would change the rules of the entire game. I would stop asking for a place at their table. I would buy the entire field. I stood up, adjusting the heavy gear that suddenly felt lighter, imbued with a new purpose. My mission wasn't just survival anymore. It was acquisition. I looked at my bank balance, the sizable savings accumulated from years of hazard pay. Untouched, unspent. It was capital. It was leverage. They had valued a spot for cranberry sauce and a champagne bucket over my seat. Fine. I would ensure that the next time they sat down to dinner, they would be sitting in my Asterix house, at my table, and they would have to earn the right to even be in the room. The house, the history, the mahogany table, it all became my objective. I would acquire it, not out of spite, but out of a desperate, primal need to establish my own undeniable worth. I was coming home, but not to reclaim my place. I was coming home to seize ownership. The soldier in me was done with defense. It was time for a meticulous, devastating offense. The planning started immediately, right there in the dust and the dark. fueled by the cold, hard memory of a hideous old chair gathering dust in a garage. I was going to buy the whole damn table, and the house it stood in, and the ground beneath it. I wouldn't need an invitation. I would hold the key. The moment the connection dropped, leaving me staring at the shimmering heat haze outside the communications hut, the world tilted. It wasn't the dust or the stifling humidity that suffocated me. It was the realization that my asterisk place asterisk was nothing more than an inconvenient piece of junk gathering dust in a dark garage. Brenda's entitled, whining voice echoed in my head. A toxic lullaby. We seriously need to move that hideous old chair. ... double quotes. That was the line in the sand. That was the moment Eliza, the dutiful daughter, died, and Eliza, the strategist, was born. I stopped mourning the loss of their recognition and started quantifying it. If they wouldn't save me a seat, I would purchase the entire damn dining room, the house, and the ground it stood on. The goal was no longer survival in this hostile environment. The goal was financial domination in theirs. My transformation was absolute. I took the intense, unrelenting focus required to stay alive in a war zone and redirected it entirely toward wealth accumulation. My hazard pay, which most of the guys spent on flashy toys or saved for a down payment on a decent truck, became my war chest. I stopped seeing it as money earned. I saw it as capital deployed. The discipline required was immense. While others were unwinding after a 17-hour shift, drinking lukewarm soda and trying to catch a fuzzy satellite broadcast of a game, I was hunched over my laptop, running numbers. I traded sleep for spreadsheets. I devoured financial textbooks like intelligence reports, highlighting key strategies for aggressive growth and risk mitigation. The military had taught me how to assess terrain and eliminate threats. Now, I applied those lessons to the stock market. I learned the language of finance PE ratios, market capitalization, high-yield options with the same urgency I had learned tactical radio codes. This was my new mission. My uniform, heavy and coarse against my skin, was a constant, physical reminder of the stakes. I was risking my life for this money. I certainly wasn't going to let it sit in a Lutrist savings account. My investments were calculated, leveraging the unique, albeit tangential, perspective my deployment gave me. I focused heavily on sectors tied to global stability and technological advancement, areas where I could deduce momentum based on the geopolitical shifts I was witnessing firsthand. This wasn't insider trading. It was simply applying superior situational awareness. I took aggressive positions. I remember the cold sweat that beaded on my brow the first time. I transferred 70% of my accrued savings into a volatile tech stock. The risk was terrifying, a paralyzing fear, unlike the clean, immediate fear of incoming fire. But then I would close my eyes and I would see the deep, mahogany grain of the dining table, and I would hear Brenda's dismissive voice, and the fear would evaporate, replaced by a ruthless, surgical calm. Asterisk, this is the cost of the chair, I told myself. This is the price of forgetting me. Asterisk, I became a ghost in my own unit. My comrades saw me as intensely disciplined, a little aloof, maybe obsessed with saving. They didn't see the hours I spent meticulously tracking the market's fluctuations, or the quiet triumph when a risky play paid off tenfold. Every successful trade was a step closer to the dining room, a victory marker on the long march home. Over the years, the deployments blurred together. Dusty heat gave way to the damp chill of a ship's galley. Then back to the sterile, late-night hum of a secure hub. My communication with the Johnson family dwindled to mandatory perfunctory check-ins. I had perfected the art of asking benign questions and listening carefully to the answers, treating their casual updates as critical intelligence. Brenda's updates were always about acquisition, a new car, a European trip, an engagement ring that cost more than my first year's salary. Her entitlement hadn't mellowed. It had metastasized, demanding ever larger luxuries. My mother's calls grew slightly more strained, marked by vague anxieties about the market and the economy. My father's voice, however, showed the most significant decay. He used to be booming and confident, the patriarch who controlled the room. Now, his updates were peppered with nervous laughter and descriptions of exciting new opportunities. That sounded suspiciously like desperate, high-risk gambles designed to keep his struggling business afloat. He never asked about my service, only about my future plans, always assuming I would return to the fold and perhaps, eventually, contribute financially to the family's upkeep. They were sinking, and they didn't even realize they were already looking to the forgotten soldier for a lifeline they hadn't earned. The underlying anxiety in their voices was delicious. It confirmed the necessity of my plan. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about securing the asset before their incompetence ruined it completely. I began tracking the Johnson estate like a predator tracking prey, using specialized online databases and, later, discreet inquiries through a network of contacts. I established the current appraised value of the house, factoring in neighborhood trends, potential market dips, and the escalating property taxes. I needed to know the exact number required not just to purchase the house, but to dominate any bidding process. I calculated the necessary war chest down to the last dollar, then added a 50% buffer for good measure. I wanted total, unquestionable control. The house became a physical manifestation of my financial target. I studied its layout, its history, its vulnerabilities. It wasn't the warm, idealized memory of my childhood home anymore. It was objective mahogany. The final year of my service was the most grueling, but also the most focused. My portfolio had matured, the initial high-risk plays having yielded spectacular returns. The numbers on the screen were no longer abstract. They represented power, leverage, and the ability to dictate terms. I meticulously liquidated assets, moving my fortune into stable, accessible accounts, ready for rapid deployment. Then came the day. I was standing in a small, windowless office, the air conditioning rattling loudly, when the commanding officer handed me the sealed envelope. Inside were my honorable discharge papers. I felt a profound, quiet sense of relief, not because the war was over, but because I had executed my primary mission successfully. I was done being a soldier for the country. Now, I was ready to execute my mission against my family. I looked at the signature of the general, then at the bank balance displayed on my encrypted phone. The numbers were staggering, far exceeding my initial projections. I had built a fortress of capital out of the rubble of their disregard. Eliza, the soldier, was retired. Eliza, the resource, was reporting for duty. I didn't call home to announce my return. I didn't want a welcome, or worse, a pity party. I landed on American soil feeling like a stranger, a highly trained operative who had returned to enemy territory. The familiar air cleaner, softer than the desert air, felt alien. I drove directly to a temporary apartment I had rented months in advance. It was sterile, anonymous, and located precisely 5 miles from the Johnson estate. Close enough for observation, far enough for secrecy. It felt less like a home and more like a tactical operations center. I unpacked my civilian clothes, but before hanging them up, I pulled out my dress uniform. I ran my hand over the crisp fabric, the meticulously arranged metals. This uniform had been the symbol of my sacrifice, the very thing they had forgotten while discussing cranberry sauce. Now, it was just a costume for the final act. I hung it carefully in the closet, knowing I would wear it one last time, not for a parade, but for a confrontation. I was back, but they didn't know it. I was a ghost in their midst, invisible and immensely wealthy. I spent the next few days driving the perimeter of the old neighborhood, mapping their movements, observing the subtle signs of their decline. I was ready to move from planning to execution. The stage was set for the architect of vengeance to claim her masterpiece. The plane touched down on American soil, but I felt no sense of homecoming. The air, thick with the smell of jet fuel and the promise of rain, felt alien after years spent breathing dust and diesel. I bypassed the emotional reunions happening at the gate. I had no one waiting for me, and that was exactly how I planned it. I drove a cheap rental car to a sterile, temporary apartment. I had leased months in advance a place far enough from the old neighborhood to ensure anonymity, yet close enough to feel the pulse of their impending collapse. The walls were beige, the furniture generic, and the silence was deep. It was the perfect observation post for a ghost preparing to become a hunter. I spent the first few days simply adjusting to the quiet, the jarring lack of constant low-grade threat. But the silence quickly became oppressive, filled only with the buzzing energy of my single, burning objective. My first official act was to drive past the Johnson estate. I pulled the rental onto the tree-lined street that had once felt like the most secure, beautiful place in the world. Now, 7 years later, the house stood like a monument to neglect. The perfect symmetry was gone. The white paint was peeling near the eaves, revealing patches of gray undercoating. The meticulous landscaping my mother used to obsess over was overgrown. Hydrangeas sprawled wildly, and the lawn was patchy, showing the yellowing signs of indifferent maintenance. Even the heavy brass knocker on the oak front door seemed tarnished, dull, and utterly defeated. The physical decay mirrored the financial ruin I knew was consuming them from the inside. I felt a sharp, cold pang, not of sympathy for the inhabitants, but of proprietary sadness for the structure itself. Asterisk, they didn't deserve this house. Asterisk, they had treated their inheritance, their comfort, with the same careless disregard they had shown my absence. I didn't linger. Observation was tactical, not sentimental. The next morning, I met Mr. Davies. He was a corporate attorney based downtown. Known for his discretion and his ruthless efficiency in high-stakes property acquisition, he was late, middle-aged, impeccably tailored, and possessed eyes that seemed to analyze the net worth of everything they rested upon. "Ms. Johnson," he said, his voice a low, precise instrument. "You've provided an unusual mandate. Complete anonymity, swift execution, and a willingness to substantially overbid. I don't want a negotiation." "Mr. Davies," I told him, leaning forward across his expansive mahogany desk far superior to the one that currently stood forgotten in my father's empty study, "I want a takeover. I want the deed in my name, and I want the family to believe the transaction was handled by a faceless entity, a corporation, someone with no history, no emotions, and an endless supply of capital." He smiled, a thin, professional gesture. "I understand. We will establish Aegis Holdings for the purpose of the acquisition. The paper trail will be impenetrable." I then presented him with the financial reports I had compiled from my own diligent research overseas, supplemented by the detailed, discreet report I had commissioned from a private investigator upon landing. The investigator's findings confirmed my worst suspicions and, simultaneously, my greatest strategic advantage. My father, bless his trusting, incompetent soul, had leveraged the house, the very foundation of our family's security, to float a series of disastrous, high-risk business ventures. He had chased the quick, extravagant profit and failed spectacularly. The banks were circling, the debt was crushing, and the sale of the estate was not merely advisable. It was an inevitability to stave off total public bankruptcy. "They are under water," Mr. Davies confirmed, sliding the thick dossier back across the desk. "The lien holders are anxious. A quiet all-cash offer will be extremely appealing to the fiduciary agents." "Then, we offer more than appealing," I stated, my voice steady. "We offer dominating. We ensure there is no possibility of a counterbid. I want them to feel the definitive, final snap of the trap." I felt no guilt. They had squandered abundance. I had earned every penny through sweat, blood, and calculated risk far greater than anything my father had ever faced in his comfortable corner office. My military discipline, forged in the unforgiving crucible of deployment, had prepared me for this financial war. While they worried about the cost of Brenda's next luxury handbag, I was systematically dismantling their financial defenses. The next few weeks were a period of agonizing, meticulous waiting. I maintained minimal contact with the outside world, my days structured around tracking the progress of Aegis Holdings. My focus was absolute. I treated the impending sale like a critical military operation. Intelligence gathered, targets confirmed, resources amassed, and now, the long wait for the window of opportunity. During this time, the PI's reports and the occasional, targeted social media search provided the grim, satisfying soundtrack to their downfall. Brenda was the most vocal mourner. Her Instagram feed was a montage of histrionic sadness, black and white photos of the house, captions dripping with manufactured nostalgia about losing our history and the cruelties of the financial world. She never once mentioned her father's recklessness or her own escalating consumer debt. Her grief was performative, a plea for external validation, but it served as excellent intelligence. It confirmed their desperate state and the public nature of their crisis. My mother was quieter, but the distress was palpable, even through the secondhand reports. She was making frantic, tearful calls to distant cousins and old friends, begging for bridge loans, promising collateral she no longer possessed. What struck me, what truly confirmed the righteousness of my cold mission, was the absolute, deafening silence regarding *me*. They were calling every estranged relative, every casual acquaintance, anyone who might possess a spare $50,000. But they never once called the one person who had millions. They never called the soldier daughter who had spent 7 years in harm's way, the one who had literally put her life on the line and accumulated the very capital that could save them. They didn't call because, in their minds, I didn't exist as a resource. I was Eliza, the perpetually deployed, vaguely inconvenient relative whose only value was the occasional patriotic anecdote. Even in the face of utter ruin, they preferred to beg strangers than acknowledge the reality of my success or the depth of their neglect. Their omission was the ultimate betrayal, proving that the cranberry sauce had indeed been more important than my chair. This realization solidified the need for anonymity. If I had simply offered to buy the house outright from them, they would have seen it as a rescue, a handout, an obligation. They would have continued to occupy the space, believing they were still entitled to my grace. I needed them to feel the eviction. I needed them to mourn the loss completely before I revealed the true architect of their fate. The silent auction closed on a Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in Mr. Davies' office, the atmosphere taut and charged. He was on the phone, speaking in low, clipped tones, occasionally nodding. I didn't fidget. My hands rested calmly on my knees, my posture military straight. I had waited 7 years. I could wait 7 minutes. He finally hung up and looked at me, his professional mask slipping just slightly to reveal a flicker of admiration. "It is done, Ms. Johnson," he stated. "Aegis Holdings has submitted the winning bid. It was substantially higher than the nearest competitor, ensuring immediate acceptance by the fiduciary. The funds have been transferred." He slid the official confirmation email across the desk. I looked at the number, the exorbitant sum I had paid to secure a piece of furniture, and a measure of justice, and felt nothing but cold, hard satisfaction. The money was a weapon, and I had used it perfectly. "The house is mine," I whispered, tasting the words. "Legally and irrevocably," Mr. Davies confirmed. "The closing documents are ready for your signature. The family has been notified that they must vacate the premises within 48 hours to allow the new owner to conduct a final walkthrough and inventory." "Excellent," I said, signing the documents with a clean, decisive stroke. "Now for the final instruction, Mr. Davies," I continued, leaning back. "I want you to personally schedule that final walkthrough. I want them to have their moment of sentimental goodbye. Let them weep in the entryway. Let them touch the walls one last time. And then," I paused, letting the silence hang heavy in the luxurious office, "I want you to meet them there, precisely at 4 p.m. on Thursday." Mr. Davies raised an eyebrow, sensing the shift in the plan. "And who will be joining me, Ms. Johnson?" I stood up, adjusting the cuff of my bespoke suit jacket. I had traded the heavy, dusty uniform for a tailored armor of wealth. "I will be joining you," I said, the words clear and sharp. "It's time for the new owner to meet the former tenants. And it's time for me to finally claim my seat at the table." I left the office, walking past the uniformed security guard and onto the busy city street. I was no longer a ghost. I was a force, armed with millions and a righteous sense of purpose. I drove back to the sterile apartment, pulled my dress uniform from the garment bag, and began pressing the crisp, dark fabric. The stage was set. The silent predator was ready to reveal herself. The air hung cold and damp, a stark contrast to the relentless, dry heat that had been my constant companion for 7 years. I sat in the idling black SUV, parked 2 blocks down the street, where the ancient oaks still managed to screen me from direct view of the Johnson estate. The house itself stood massive and imposing, a monument to a legacy I had once desperately wanted to be part of, and now had the resources to control. I watched them arrive. My father's old sedan pulled up first, tires crunching gravel in the familiar driveway. He looked older than the last blurry photo I had seen, stooped, his shoulders carrying the visible weight of failure rather than the proud posture of the successful businessman I remembered. My mother emerged, clutching a tissue, her face puffy and stained with fresh tears. Her grief, I noted clinically, was purely performative, designed to elicit sympathy from the empty street, and perhaps from the universe itself. Then Brenda arrived, pulling her pristine white luxury coupe right up to the front steps, disregarding the landscaping she was about to lose forever. Her appearance was meticulous, even in supposed distress. She wore designer sunglasses that failed to hide the dramatic downturn of her mouth, and she immediately pulled out her phone, angling for a perfect, tear-streaked shot against the backdrop of the massive oak front door. Asterisk, the tragedy of losing my inheritance. Asterisk, I thought. Asterisk must be properly documented for her followers. Asterisk, they huddled together briefly. A tableau of manufactured sorrow. I felt nothing for them, no softening, no residual flicker of filial duty. My emotions had been burned away by too many desert sunrises and too many nights spent calculating futures on a worn spreadsheet. They were simply the former tenants, about to receive their eviction notice, delivered by the most unexpected landlord. I checked my watch. Time to move. I slipped out of the SUV. I was wearing a charcoal gray suit, tailored, sharp and precise, a deliberate choice over the uniform. The suit conveyed power in their world. The uniform, to them, was just a costume for a job they never understood. My boots, highly polished, military issue, made a soft, decisive asterisk, thud asterisk on the asphalt with every stride. I didn't approach the front door. I circled around the back, moving through the overgrown rose bushes that my father had always promised to trim. The back entrance was unlocked, an old habit of carelessness that had likely served them ill in other aspects of their lives. I stepped into the kitchen. The silence hit me first. It was the heavy, pregnant silence of a place that knows it is about to change hands. The air smelled faintly of stale spice and lemon cleaner. I remembered standing here 7 years ago, saying a quick, awkward goodbye to my mother before my first deployment. Her mind already drifting to the logistics of the next bridge game. I moved silently across the cold tile floor, past the stainless steel appliances they had installed after I left. I positioned myself just beyond the swinging door that led from the kitchen into the main hallway, a strategic blind spot that offered a clear view of the entryway and, more importantly, the dining room archway. I heard the muffled voices of my family from the entryway. "It's just unbelievable, Father," Brenda whined, her voice carrying easily through the thick walls. "A corporation? They didn't even give us a chance to match the offer. It's cruel." "It's business, Brenda," my father replied, his voice flat with defeat. "We waited too long." The bank was ruthless. Just then, the front door opened again, and Mr. Davies, my lawyer, stepped inside. He was impeccably dressed, carrying a slim leather briefcase and an air of quiet, expensive authority. He offered them a brief, professional nod. "Mr. Johnson, Mrs. Johnson, Ms. Brenda, thank you for accommodating this final requirement. We need to ensure the property is fully vacated and the keys are exchanged." My mother burst into fresh tears, dabbing at her eyes. "Oh, Mr. Davies, it's just so hard. All our memories are here." "I understand, madam," Davies said smoothly, "but the transfer is complete. The funds have cleared. I am here representing the new owner, who is prepared to finalize the transfer of keys immediately." My father straightened, attempting to salvage some dignity. "And who is this owner, Mr. Davies? We were told it was a blind trust. Does this person have a name?" Davies paused, his eyes flicking toward my hiding spot behind the kitchen door. It was an almost imperceptible signal, but I caught it. The moment had arrived. "The buyer preferred to remain anonymous during the bidding process," Davies stated, his voice ringing slightly louder now, ensuring the words carried. "But she wished to meet you now. She felt it was important to conclude this transaction personally." He turned slowly, gesturing toward the archway where I stood. I stepped out. The silence that descended upon the entryway was immediate and absolute, heavier than the weight of the house itself. It felt like the sudden vacuum after an explosion. I saw their faces in sequence, a gallery of shock. My mother's hand, which had been resting delicately on my father's sleeve, flew to her mouth. Her eyes, red from weeping, widened into perfect circles of She was trying to process the image, the tailored suit, the severe haircut, the face that was undeniably mine, yet utterly foreign to the girl she last remembered. My father's jaw dropped. The defeat that had been carved into his features was instantly replaced by a frantic, scrambling confusion. He looked at me, then at Davies, then back at me, searching for the punchline, the explanation, the comforting lie that would make this impossible reality vanish. Brenda's reaction was the most satisfying. Her manufactured grief evaporated entirely. Her eyes narrowed, not in sorrow, but in pure, unadulterated shock and fury. She took a step back, as if facing something poisonous. I didn't speak. I simply stood there, allowing the full weight of my presence to settle upon them. I was no longer the absent ghost, the soldier they occasionally remembered to send a Christmas card to. I was the force that had just erased their entire financial foundation. I ignored my mother's choked, half-formed gasp. "Eliza, what?" and my father's stammering attempt to form a coherent question. Their voices were noise now, irrelevant, static. My mission was the dining room. I walked past them. My movement was deliberate, slow, and unwavering. I felt the heat of their stunned gazes burning into my back, but I kept my focus forward, toward the sacred heart of the house. The marble floor of the entryway gave way to the rich, dark hardwood of the dining room. The room was exactly as I remembered it, flooded with the pale winter light filtering through the tall windows. The chandelier, still dusty, hung above the centerpiece of my obsession, the massive mahogany table. I approached it, running my hand over the cool, deeply polished grain. I remembered the exact location of the small, crescent-shaped scratch near the head of the table. A mark left by my own fork when I was 10, terrified of telling my father I had failed a math test. I stopped at the head of the table. The chair that had been *mine*, the high-backed piece Brenda had relegated to the garage to gather dust, was, predictably, absent. There was only a blank space. A gap where 7 years of my life and sacrifice should have been honored. Mr. Davies walked up beside me, holding out a heavy brass key. The official key to the front door. The symbol of absolute ownership. I took it. The cold metal felt solid and intensely real in my palm. I held it up, letting the light catch the engraved details of the Johnson family crest, which my father had insisted on having etched into the key handle 20 years ago. My family had followed me into the dining room, huddling near the entrance archway like unwelcome spectators at a private ceremony. My father finally managed to articulate a demand, his voice trembling with disbelief. "Eliza, what is the meaning of this? You bought the house? What? How?" I looked directly at him, then swept my gaze over my mother and Brenda. My voice, when it came, was low, steady, and utterly devoid of warmth. It was the tone I used when giving essential commands in the field. "I didn't buy just the house, Father," I said, my eyes locking onto the polished surface of the mahogany. "I purchased the entire estate. Every deed, every fixture, every last stick of furniture and heirloom." I lifted the key and slammed it down onto the table with a sharp, echoing asterisk, thwack, asterisk. The sound reverberated through the silent room, a gavel sealing their fate. "Including," I finished, my voice rising slightly, "this table." I took a breath, letting the magnitude of the declaration sink in the total, irrevocable transfer of power. The stage was set. The forgotten daughter was home, and she was seated at the head of the table she now owned. Chapter 5. My table, my terms, the heavy brass key lay between us, a monument to 7 years of calculated sacrifice and 3 decades of casual neglect. Its shine reflected the chandelier light, a beacon of my victory in the center of the mahogany battlefield. The silence that followed my declaration asterisk, "I bought the entire estate asterisk," was not the quiet of reverence, but the deafening hush of absolute collapse. My father, whose face had been a mask of confusion, finally shattered. "Eliza? You?" His voice was a rasp, thick with disbelief and a rapidly escalating, defensive anger. He took a clumsy step toward me, his hand raised in a gesture that was half plea, half threat. "What in God's name are you doing? After everything, after we raised you, after you left, you come back and do asterisk. This asterisk." My mother, her face slick with tears, tried to rush me, her hands outstretched. "Honey, please, let's talk. This is just a terrible misunderstanding. We are family." I did not flinch. I did not move. I simply raised my hand, palm out, a gesture so sharp and definitive that it stopped them both dead in their tracks. It was the universal military sign for asterisk halt asterisk, and they obeyed it instantly, instinctively. They had forgotten how to recognize authority, but they recognized power when it stood before them. "Stop," I commanded, my voice low, but carrying the weight of the years. I could feel the steel in my spine, forged in the deserts I had left behind. "There is nothing to talk about, Mother. There is nothing to misunderstand, Father. The legal documents are signed. The money has been transferred. Mr. Davies handled everything meticulously. This house, this land, and every piece of furniture within these walls, including this table, is legally and irrevocably mine." I glanced at Mr. Davies, who stood silently by the doorway, a discreet sentinel confirming the finality of the transaction. He was observing their distress with the cool neutrality of a professional who had seen countless fortunes rise and fall. I turned back to my family, letting my gaze linger on Brenda. She had managed to wipe away her dramatic, performative tears, replacing them with a look of venomous entitlement. She was already calculating how this unexpected twist affected her inheritance, her status, her future comfort. "You want to know why I did this?" I asked, the question hanging in the air. I didn't wait for their response. I did this because I learned, very early on, that if you want a seat at the table, you cannot wait for someone to save it for you. You have to buy the room and set the rules. I walked slowly around the dining room, my fingers trailing along the high, curved backs of the 8 chairs. I remembered the last time I had sat here, a nervous girl preparing to ship out, promising I would be back soon. 7 years. 7 Thanksgivings. 7 Christmases. "Do you remember Thanksgiving, 7 years ago?" I asked, stopping at the corner where my chair used to sit. I called from a communications tent where the air was so thick with dust I could practically chew it. "I was listening to the sound of your laughter, the clinking of your silverware, the absolute, blissful normalcy of your lives." My mother started to whimper softly, but I ignored her. "I asked where my spot was," I continued, my voice steady, pulling the memory from the deep, cold vault where I had stored it. "And you, Mother, you said, 'Oh honey, we just needed the space for the cranberry sauce this year.' The cranberry sauce, a side dish, easily moved, easily accommodated. But my place, my presence, that was deemed inconvenient. It was displaced by a condiment." I moved to the next chair. That call cost me half a day's pay, and it cost you my loyalty. Because in that moment, I understood that the danger I faced, the sacrifice I was making it, was all meaningless to you. You weren't malicious. You were simply forgetful. And forgetfulness, in this context, is the deepest insult. I looked directly at Brenda, who was now shifting uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes. And then there was Christmas. My last chair, the one I sat in for 18 years, the one that symbolized my membership in this family. I remembered the static-laced sound of her voice, sharp and spoiled, echoing across thousands of miles. Dad, we seriously need to move that hideous old chair. It's just gathering dust in the garage, and I need the corner space for my champagne bucket. I let the words hang there, heavy and accusatory. Do you understand the contrast, Brenda? While you were planning where to store your champagne bucket, I was planning how to survive the next IED sweep. While you were worried about dust gathering on an antique chair, I was worried about the dust settling on my coffin. My father interjected, his face flushed. That is unfair, Eliza. We missed you. We prayed for you. We were worried sick. Worry is cheap, father, I countered instantly, cutting him off before his self-pity could gain momentum. Worry costs nothing. Action costs everything. While you were worrying, I was working. While you were spending your holidays here, safe and comfortable, I was studying the markets. I was taking my hazard path and money earned from walking into active danger and treating it not as a bonus, but as capital. I laid out the financial reality, stripping away their emotional defenses with cold facts. I spent 7 years learning to be a financial predator. My military discipline became my financial discipline. Every hour I spent poring over spreadsheets instead of sleeping. Every calculated risk I took in high-yield Stocksit was all fueled by the image of that cranberry sauce and that chair in the garage. I paused, letting the weight of my transformation settle upon them. You want to know the real reason this house was lost? It wasn't just bad luck. It was carelessness. It was arrogance. You failed to manage your abundance. You valued comfort over commitment. You assumed the estate would simply sustain itself, while you indulged Brenda's escalating consumerism and your own increasingly reckless business ventures. I gestured around the grand room, now looking slightly faded under the scrutiny of my ownership. I know the full extent of the debt, father. Mr. Davies has the reports. Had I not intervened, had I not created a shell corporation to execute a clean, silent purchase, his house would have been seized by the creditors and sold in a public, humiliating foreclosure. I didn't buy this house out of love for you. I bought it out of respect for the Johnson name, which you were about to drag through the mud. My father staggered back slightly, his face draining of color. The realization that I knew the precise, ugly details of his financial ruin seemed to hit him harder than the revelation of my ownership. You saved us from bankruptcy, he whispered, the anger replaced by a horrifying, desperate recognition. I saved the property. I corrected him sharply. I did not save you. You are still accountable for your actions. I simply ensured that the Johnson legacy, symbolized by this estate, remains intact under MY management. My mother finally found her voice, pleading. But, Eliza, honey, we can fix this. We can pay you back. We can live here. And we'll be a family again, just like you always wanted. I let out a soft, humorless laugh that echoed strangely in the familiar room. You mistake my motivation, mother. I stopped wanting to be just a family the moment I realized my value was less than a side dish. There is no paying me back. The deed is finalized. The ownership is absolute. I walked to the head of the mahogany table, the seat that had always been reserved for the patriarch, the seat that had been empty in my honor for years. I stopped there, my hands resting on the polished wood, claiming the space completely. I felt the immense, satisfying sense of control wash over me. However, I continued, my eyes sweeping over their stunned faces, I am a traditionalist. The Johnson family dinner tradition will continue. This house will still be the gathering place. Brenda looked up, a flicker of hope or, perhaps, calculation in her eyes. But it will continue on my asterisk terms, I finished, extinguishing that flicker. You see, I didn't just buy the house. I bought the right to decide who sits at this table and who is relegated to the garage. This table will be used for gatherings, yes, but only those who demonstrate genuine, active respect for my presence, my sacrifice, and my authority will receive an invitation. I looked pointedly at Brenda. You wanted the corner space for your champagne bucket? You got it. You can stand there and serve the wine, if I allow you in the room at all. My gaze shifted to my mother. You wanted to prioritize the cranberry sauce? Enjoy it, mother. but know that every meal eaten here will be a reminder of the cost of that choice. Finally, I looked at my father, who looked utterly defeated, the weight of his failure crushing him. You asked why I did this, Father. I did this because I needed to know, without question, that I belonged somewhere. And if my own family wouldn't save me a seat, I was going to ensure that I owned every single chair in the house. I risked my life for this country, and I risked my fortune for this moment. I earned this table. I straightened up, adopting the posture I had worn so often when addressing a unit tall, unyielding, and completely detached from emotion. This is my house now, I stated, the finality ringing in the air. I nodded toward the entryway. You have 30 minutes to collect any small, personal effects you may have missed during the walkthrough. After that, the security codes are changed, and the perimeter is locked down. I paused, giving them one last chance to speak, to apologize, to beg. But they were silent, realizing that words were useless against the mountain of steel and cash I had built. You may leave now, I concluded, my voice dropping back to that cold, steady command. I watched them turn my father, stooped and broken. My mother, weeping silently into her hands. And Brenda, shooting me a look of pure, incandescent hatred that I finally recognized as fear. They walked out of the dining room, past Mr. Davies, and toward the front door of the house they no longer owned. I did not follow them. I remained standing at the head of the massive mahogany table, the rightful owner of everything around me. The key still rested where I had slammed it down, a tiny, glittering symbol of absolute victory. I hadn't just acquired a house. I had acquired peace. I had acquired power. I had finally, definitively, saved my own seat. And it was the best, most expensive seat in the entire room.